there's a reality that if you have a boundary and it continues to be crossed, you have to come up with what that consequence will be for you.
Terri Cole is a psychotherapist. She is the podcast host of The Terri Cole Show and author of Boundary Boss. Now, Terri joined us on the podcast, I think it was about a year and a half ago now, for an episode all around cheating and infidelity, and that was truly very insightful. If you have ever experienced cheating or it's been something that's come up in your relationships, please go back and listen to that episode. Now, so many of you over the years have asked us to have Terri back on to talk about the thing that she is more than an expert in, and that is boundaries. And that is exactly what we're going to be talking about today. Terri, welcome back to Life Uncut.
Why, thanks for having me, you guys. I'm so psyched to be back.
Terri, do you have an embarrassing story to share with us today? Because I know you shared one a couple of years ago, but I'm hoping we aren't the only ones in life that have just one embarrassing story.
No, there's been a bit of time. I feel like something else could have happened.
Something else could have happened. Well, this is something that I feel like people wouldn't think about me because of my personality. But like, I've been living in this house in the country for 20 years with my husband and, apartment in the city, whatever. I need a GPS to go to my local mall. Like still, I've been here 20 years. And when I tried not using it, my sister and I both, she's the worst. I mean, actually, I'm the worst. And then she's the worst after that. She lives about a half an hour from here. I'm like, all right, let's meet at the mall. She's like, okay. I was like, don't use your GPS because Kath, at this point, we have to have this. And we literally both got lost. And we were like, just never tell anyone that. Or go on a podcast and tell everyone that. But like, what is that about being directionally challenged? I just want to know.
I am the same way. I grew up in a town that only had 2 set of traffic lights. Like, this is a small town, and I used to know one way everywhere. And if I had to take if I had to change route, if like it was blocked off and like detour, I'd be like, no.
See, that's not my thing. My thing more so is like, if I'm driving with someone else in the car, I just turn my brain off. Like, if they're giving me directions, even if I know the way, if they have been allocated the role of the direction person, my brain just goes, all right, well, I guess I'm turning off now, having a little sleep.
Yep.
And that's when I am absolutely useless at it as well.
That makes sense, though.
We're hearing this buzzword, boundaries. Everyone's saying it. It's taking off on TikTok, and it shouldn't be a buzzword, but I feel like it's really having its moment in the spotlight. Talk us through the basics. What is a boundary and why are they important in relationships?
So I want you to think about your boundaries as your own personal rules of engagement. This lets other people know what's okay with you, what's not okay with you. According to me, your boundaries are made up of your preferences, your desires, your limits, and your deal breakers, right? So those 4 things are what your boundaries are made up of. And it's not enough to know them, which part of the problem is most people don't even know them, but you have to know them and then have the ability to communicate them readily when you so choose. So why are they important? This is how people know us, because think about your boundaries, preferences, desires, limits, deal breakers. They're not just your boundaries. All of those things also make up who you are uniquely yourself. So when we've been taught to be the cool girl, you know me, no fuss, no muss, whatever's good with you, it's all good, what we're really doing is denying the people in our life the ability to actually know who we are. Like, a lot of times we do it because we don't like conflict, or we don't want any problems, or we're managing the crap out of the people in our sphere. Anyone managing other people?
Yes.
Yeah. Everybody is. What people always ask me is, why don't I know? Right? Especially because my crew is like super high functioning, highly capable women in particular. That is my posse. And they just don't they feel bad. They're like, I could figure out anything. Why can't I figure this out? And it's basically, you don't know it because nobody taught you. It's as long and as short as that. And just like a language, you can learn it.
What about in terms of if you're a people pleaser and you find it difficult to disappoint people? And I think because like I've heard boundaries being spoken about in terms of, you have a low self-worth and that's why you're finding it hard to kind of, put down and lay down your boundaries and communicate those boundaries. But what if you don't have a low self-worth? What if you feel as though you are confident in yourself, but you have this innate feeling that you hate making people feel disappointed and therefore you always seem to go above and beyond, not because you're lacking in self-confidence, but because you hate this feeling of like, just like I'm a disappointment or I've disappointed them.
Yeah. Well, kind of what you're talking about is what my next book is about, which is high functioning codependency.
Yeah, right.
That's you,
So,
Laura.
That's
right?
That's you. Can we order the
Yes.
first copy?
We're back to having a therapy session where Laura unpacks her own trauma. Yes. How did we end up here? No, but I mean, I do ask the question because and it probably is one that is introspective, but I don't see myself as being like lacking in what's the right? Well, I'm not insecure. I'm not lacking in those things. I don't see that anyway, but I do find it very challenging for myself. I am a people pleaser and I find it very hard to say no to people if they have guilted me into doing something.
We had this exact conversation over the last few days with Laura. This exact thing. It couldn't be more perfect timing. Where Laura is so confident and sure of herself, but she will always say yes when she doesn't want to do something for that exact reason, because she doesn't want to disappoint someone. And I was like, but that's your boundary. Like, you don't want to do this. You don't have to do it. She's like, but I just feel bad. That's the exact reason.
All right. So what we're talking about is the same exact thing. And you can understand why I'm writing a whole book about it, because it is about disordered boundaries. Because when you say yes, when you really want to say no, that's a dysfunctional boundary, obviously. You don't have to. The reason why I coined a new phrase, high functioning codependency, because I'm like you and because my crew is like you. We're highly capable, like masters of the universe, getting shit done, doing all the things and running the stuff. Like a lot of times we're the person that people go to in your friendship group. You're the rock in the family. You're the one that makes everything happen. And yet you are most likely overly invested in the feeling states, the outcomes, the decisions, the circumstances, the relationships of the people in your life, to the detriment of your own internal peace. And that's the definition of being a high functioning codependent. So the why you don't want to disappoint people is going to be as unique as your childhood was, right? We're all going to have our why as to what does it mean, why we don't want to disappoint. But what really becomes evident in the teaching of the high functioning codependency is that when we continue to self-abandon, force ourselves to do crap we don't want to do, say yes when we want to say no, that's a heavier price to pay. And so what ends up happening is you will learn in your life, if you want to get over this people-pleasing aspect of your personality, because it really doesn't match really the rest of your personality, Laura. Like what we're talking about, it actually kind of doesn't. And think about it this way. When we say yes when we want to say no, we're doing it with resentment. Like there's a cost to the relationship, to how we feel about the person. Because in my 20s, I was much more of a people pleaser then. And it's like, I would be like, oh, Betty is so entitled. It's her. I cannot believe, why is she asking me to do all this stuff? What the hell is wrong with her? And it's funny. A girlfriend of mine, Kate Northrup, we were walking in New York a bunch of years ago, and she was complaining the whole time about this person who she'd done so much for. And she was like, who is like this? I can't believe she's asking me to do more, blah, blah, blah. Like the whole time where we were walking to an event. And when we got there, I said, yeah, Kate, she's got some nerve putting you in a position to have to say no. And she was like, oh my God, Terri, you're so right. Like, it's literally on me to say no. I'm like, yeah, because here's the thing, you guys, and you know this, taker's going to take, right? It's up to the givers to set limits.
Okay, but in saying that, and I guess like I don't want to jump too far in the future before we kind of unpack more around like setting up what boundaries are, but I guess my big question to that is, how do you then get over the feeling that someone is not going to like you, or they're going to be angry at you, or there's going to be repercussions for the no in which you're placing? And whether that be within your own family, whether that be within a work environment, I think for people who struggle to set boundaries, it's often because they're so worried about how that's going to impact the other person.
But do you think that is not putting so much value on your worth on someone's opinion of you? Like you're then saying like, I can't possibly get over the fact that they might not like me if I say no, but then that's putting your self-worth in their hands.
Here, the question, the original question is, how do I get over the feeling? Well, you learn to tolerate the feeling, and then you start to have positive experiences, because it's not just a bad feeling that comes when you set honest boundaries. You deepen the intimacy in your life. You allow yourself to exhale. You have relationships that also feed you. You allow people to help you. Like there's more mutuality when you're not managing people, because here's what's happening. When you're saying yes, when you really want to say no, and you guys, let's all get clear. If you are in a relationship, if you have a family, it doesn't mean we're never going to do shit we don't want to do. We do it for love. We do it for compromise. We do it because that's called being in a relationship. We're talking about times when you really could say no. It's your decision to make, and that you don't allow yourself to say no. That's really what we're talking about. And the real question, and what I would say, this could be helpful to anybody listening, is try to get to the original injury, because there is one there, of what is it about when someone is wanting something from you that you kind of don't want to give them, or don't have the bandwidth for, or are tired or whatever. Who do they remind you of? Right? The three questions that we ask to figure out if you're having a transference is, who does this person remind me of? Where have I felt like this before? And how is this behavioral dynamic, right? Like someone asking me to do something I don't want to do, but then me doing it and then me feeling resentful. How is that familiar to you? Maybe you saw it with, the adults in your life. Maybe you've experienced it, or maybe in childhood. I don't know. But that can help figure out why it feels so threatening, because what you're describing is a child's feeling of that experience, right?
What
Because grown up you doesn't feel that way. Do you know what I mean? It's a kid
100%.
who's afraid.
In order to kind of go back a little bit for people, because I know that everybody experiences boundary setting in different ways, and it impacts them in different ways, even if the end result is very similar. What would you say constitutes or represents somebody who is very bad at setting boundaries? Like, what does that look like, and how could they identify that they're bad at boundary setting?
Yep. All right. So let's look at the types of boundaries that there are. And if anyone wants to know their boundary type, I have a free quiz online. It's just boundaryquiz.com. It's super easy. And there's 13 quick questions, and it'll tell you there's like 7 archetypes. So you might be more of a peacekeeper, or might be more of a chameleon. And you will get your results from the quiz. Anyway, so you could have porous boundaries, which are boundaries that are too malleable. They're too loose, right? So that's more saying yes when you want to say no, more of a chameleon, more of a peacekeeper, more of a pushover type. You might have rigid boundaries. And this is the thing that people barely ever talk about. They feel like having bad boundaries only means being like a doormat to other people. That's not true. Having rigid boundaries is the my way or the highway people, the people who would be so quick to literally cut you off. If you hurt their feelings, they couldn't ghost you in like 2.2 seconds. They rather than be vulnerable and tell you that you hurt their feelings. So that a rigid boundary is where your boundary is too hard. There's no flexibility. And then in the middle of that, of course, is healthy boundaries, where there's a certain healthy flexibility where we can compromise and we can work with other people, but we know who we are. We know what we think. We value our own opinions. We know that we're not responsible for other people's feelings, right? Like the definition really is being super clear about what is your side of the street, emotionally and in every other way, and what is someone else's side of the street. And when you have enmeshed or porous boundaries, you don't know that. You feel like your friend's crisis is your crisis. Like you can tell if you have disordered boundaries in this way and in a codependent way. If you check your urgency, the moment your friend calls you and is in a panic, how quickly is your heart racing, and you being like, oh my God, I'm Googling the answer. I know someone, I'm texting people, I'm in fix-it mode immediately. But it's like taking it on rather than being like, how can I best support you? Or, you know what I mean?
What is that linkage? What is the linkage between poor boundaries and codependency?
The foundation of codependency is disordered boundaries, right? Because what does it mean when you're codependent? Overly invested in, overly involved in feeling states, outcomes, relationships, circumstances of the people in your life, to the detriment of your own internal peace, financial well-being, spiritual well-being. You cannot be codependent and have good boundaries.
Yeah.
Those two things don't go together. So, and when you really think about codependency, it is a covert or overt bid to control other people's outcomes.
So interesting. I love these conversations because I do genuinely
You
feel,
relate.
oh my, so in so many ways. And then it makes me go, that's what I've been doing wrong for 36 years.
Yeah,
How did
but
this happen?
I also think it's so important to know, like, I mean, I don't want to say it's easy, but it is easy in a way to change who you are and your boundaries that you do put on your life and your friends and your relationships. I used to be like you, Laura, and we were talking about this last night too. I used to have no boundaries. Say yes, let people walk all over me, do everything, never want to hurt anyone's feelings. And then I think I just got shat on so many times that I am so far on the other spectrum now where if I do not want to do something that I don't have to do, I can pretty easily say no. Obviously, there are times you do something you want to do, and I think that's important to note too, what you said earlier, Terri, like there's always going to be things that you do for a certain reason that you don't want to do. Like that is life. But when you don't have to actually turn up somewhere and you're doing it completely against your will, that's when you have to start to say no.
But okay, we talk about, and you mentioned it, that's the difference between someone who is hard and has, poor boundary settings, but in the total opposite direction, which is the conversation that doesn't get enough airtime. We also see people abuse the use of the idea of boundaries. Like instead of saying, and using boundaries as a weapon in a relationship, like, well, this is my boundary. I'm just telling you how I feel. And like, we've all learned this sort of therapy talk now. And I think that there are people who you get into relationships with who know how to use that therapy talk, but actually it's in a very non-constructive and like very damaging way to the relationship. We saw it recently with the big conversation that hit the media, which was Jonah Hill. And how he tried to set boundaries with his ex-girlfriend, and what did that look like?
He was just being an asshole.
Yeah. And I guess my big question here is how does one recognize the difference between what is healthy boundary setting and when someone is actually using it as a control technique or as, not even if it's control, but just that they're being an asshole with the boundaries that they're trying to set?
But it is control, though. So let's go back to that, especially if we're talking about the Jonah Hill, Sarah Brady thing, where he was presenting his coercive control over her. He met her and knew she was a surfer. He met her because of her Instagram feed. And now he's like, you can't wear a bathing suit in your Instagram feed. That's my boundary. No, it's not. It would be like Sarah Brady saying to him, I met you and you were a famous actor, and now it's a year in or 8 months in. And my boundary is that you don't ever have a kissing scene with another actor. That's my boundary. No, it's not. That's also not a boundary. So how do we know is when the other person is using the term boundary, but what they're doing is trying to control you with it. So I'm going to give you an example. I had a client who had a husband who he liked to go to bed late. She liked to go to bed early. And this kind of brought a bunch of conflict in the relationship. She was always coming in being like, I don't know why he goes to bed so late. It's like ridiculous. And he comes in and wakes me up, blah, blah, blah. My problem with the whole thing is that he would not be considerate. So she'd go to bed at 10. He'd come in at 1 and basically turn the light on, get undressed in the bedroom. You're like, dude.
So rude.
Anyway, so she was like, he should come to bed earlier. He needs more sleep. It's my boundary. And I was like, no, that's you trying to control him. That's you being his mother. That's you thinking he's a grown man. If he wants to sleep 6 hours a night, that literally is his prerogative in life. Where it is your boundary is making a simple request that he get undressed in the other room, that he use a small light from his phone so he's not flipping on the overhead light while you've been asleep for 3 hours. Like, that's where it spilled onto her side of the street. And also, we talked about them compromising, and then they decided, 3 nights a week to go to bed at 10 together or whatever it was. But that's the distinction. Her trying to control his bedtime is not a boundary.
Yeah.
Her making a request that he not be an inconsiderate boob is, right? That is a boundary. But I think that's a good distinction between control and actual boundary.
Oh, you go on. Yeah.
How important do you think it is to set your boundaries at the beginning of a relationship? Let's just talk about romantic relationships. How important do you think it is to set your boundaries at the beginning of a romantic relationship as opposed to implementing your boundaries along the way as things come up? And in saying that, are you allowed to just change your boundary whenever you want? Like, something was okay yesterday. It's not okay anymore.
Yes. Now, I wouldn't do it that willy-nilly, let's say. But the question is, can we evolve in a relationship? Maybe I was willing to do X, Y, and Z 5 years ago. Maybe I'm no longer willing to do that. And that requires a conversation, acknowledging, hey, this used to work for me and it no longer does. So let's renegotiate this. That's why I always have couples do what I call a couple vision, where annually you sit down and you're like, okay, how do we want to spend our money? How do we want to spend our time? If we have free time, are we talking about the right things? Are we having enough sex? Are we like, where are we? And every other week also having a state of the union, because we do change. I mean, geez, I hope so.
Yeah.
Like, are we hoping that we're going to stay like we were when we were seniors in high school? No. So the most important thing though in a relationship is have really in-depth conversations about what works, about how you feel about things, about what you want. I remember when I met my husband, I was so over dating in New York City. I was single, I'd had long-term relationships, but I was like a serial monogamist where it was, I was like, yeah, for now, but like forever, no, definitely not. As soon as they'd be like, I think we should get engaged, I'm like, I think we should break up. Until my husband, actually. And I remember being like, I'm so much happier. Like, I've built a really great life. So being alone, there's nothing wrong with it. I've had 3 amazing careers. I've got great friends. I travel around. I do what I want. That's what I want to do. And I remember when I met my husband, I just straight up was like, I'm looking for someone to be a partner who wants to buy a second home with me, who would consider having a kid, who would, like, I just said all the things because I was like, here's the thing. If he's like, wow, that's scary, bye. I don't have time. I don't care. And so there was something so liberating about telling the truth about how I felt, setting boundaries, right? I didn't want someone who had addiction issues because I had addiction. Like, I was in recovery. I was like, I don't need anyone who's got any of those issues for me, right? There was a whole bunch of things. And in being able to just say them, it wasted no time. And my husband at the time, he was like, sounds good. I was like, wait, all that sounds good?
I think this is so interesting because so many people, and I know that like I've experienced it, but like it comes from wanting to like be this people pleaser. It's wanting to kind of mold yourself to what another person wants. Oh, you're not looking for anything serious? That's okay. Like, let's just see what happens. Let's just see where this goes. Like, I think so many of us have been guilty of being fearful of asking for what we want in case the answer back is no. And then so you think, well, maybe if I bide myself a little bit more time, they'll change their mind. And really all you can end up doing, and I'm sure that there are situations where people do end up changing their mind and they live happily ever after, but you're expecting that you're the exception to that situation. And then a very probable possibility is that you invest a lot of time in someone and something that was never ever going to move forward anyway.
Yeah. And the thing is, it's like hiding who you are, hiding what you want, and then being in a relationship and being like, gee, I wonder why I feel existentially lonely in this relationship. Oh, I know why. Because the person doesn't know who you are, because you're too busy trying to be what you think they want you to be. And there's something so liberating. And I see this with my therapy clients when they finally just get like what is unique about them, who they are, that is their special sauce. Like, it's not like trying to be like other people, and embracing that. And when you have that kind of level of self-respect, what ends up happening is that it is just, it magnetizes the right people to you, because you're not afraid. You're not afraid to be alone. You're not afraid to tell the truth. You're not afraid to say no. And I always feel this way about people getting sexual really early, speaking of boundaries, because back to Britt's question about, so do we set the boundaries early and often, or do we wait to see what comes up? I think with important things, we shouldn't wait to see what comes up, because by then you've already invested your youth and your beauty. You've already invested your time, maybe your body, who knows, right? Like, so being truthful about what you're looking for, even if it's you're looking for something that can turn into something, right? And exactly what you said, Laura, like, if someone's like, oh, it's casual, and if you go out with them, even though it's the exact opposite of what you're looking for, that is self-abandonment.
Yeah.
That is putting what they want above what you want. And who knows why they're saying it. You're right. People can change their mind. And if you go, no, I mean, I know a couple where this happened, where he was trying to break up with her after 2 years. And she was like, this is what you do. You're ridiculous. This is your pattern. We're meant to be. And you're definitely going to wake up and see that. So forget about trying to break up with me. How about learning how to talk? And they actually got into like couples therapy, and they've been married for 30 years now. But I thought that was really funny, where she was like, this is your pattern, and it's just dumb.
But also, is that, I mean, I feel like I've been in that situation before where someone tried to break up with me and I just said no.
You're not going.
Yeah.
That's my boundary.
Yeah, because I wasn't ready. I was like, my boundary is no. And they were like, okay. But they wanted to break up with me.
But they were codependent and they found it really hard to set boundaries. So they
yeah,
stayed
so
for
they were
another-
like, okay. So we both just stayed, like just because I wasn't ready.
No, I would love to jump back a second, Terry. When you were speaking about using boundaries as a control and it being like a toxic and how it's kind of evolved into, a way in which people are able to kind of control their relationships. I would love to unpack a little bit more of a situation where, say, somebody has, and I know we touched on cheating so much in a last conversation that we had with you, but say you're dating someone who has cheated or they have done some serious damage to the relationship because their actions or whatever were outside of what was the agreed upon arrangement. Let's say they've gone out and cheated. And then in order to rebuild that trust, you do have rules around your boundaries. Like you're not allowed to be on this type of Instagram or you're not allowed to be doing this or XYZ. Mm-hmm. Does that then cross over into controlling that person or are they boundaries? Because I kind of wonder if in order to repair the damage, there needs to be some rules around behavior so that the trust can be rebuilt.
See, the thing is, it really depends on the situation because that becomes so much like mothering and monitoring and managing and all this crap that is not your responsibility. And what does it say about someone? Like, I know that there are many people, my, what do you want to say? People in my field, who are like, listen, cheating can be the best thing that ever happened to a relationship and it can become super strong because of it. Yes, it can. And it can also just be habitual hell. Yeah. So I think it depends on the history and the person and what does the person who cheated want? Do they really want to be together? Do they have a history of this? Is this the only time ever that it's happened? Because here's the thing. Most people, there's two reasons people cheat, according to me. You cheat because there's something pathologically happening within you, right? We have habitual cheaters who this is what they do. They could be sex addicts. They could be love addicts. They just can't get enough. One relationship is not going to be enough. That's one scenario. And then you have people who cannot communicate in a relationship. They're not getting their needs met. They build up so much resentment that they become sort of low-hanging fruit to have an affair because part of them just needs to get the hell out of the relationship. And, what's a surefire way of getting out is getting caught, usually, right? If it's that case, and then they get into therapy and start talking and start really dealing with all the shit they haven't dealt with, that's where I see it's possible for there to be, a coming back together and honestly having it be better than it was originally. But you have to excavate all of that stuff. You have to talk about those things. So I know what you're saying about the boundaries. Like it makes sense to a degree because how are you going to, build trust back? But it's so like just the thought of that, of being in a relationship and being like, you can't be on this thing because you follow models or you can't, it just seems so beneath the person who's having to be like, let me see your phone. You know what I mean? Like
totally.
I was just putting myself in the situation as we were talking and I would rather not be in a relationship with someone if I had to put those quote unquote boundaries on someone and say, I want access to your phone whenever I want. You cannot have Instagram. Yeah. You cannot be out drinking on a Friday night. If I had to be putting those boundaries because I was worried they were going to cheat on me, personally, I wouldn't be in the relationship because I just think trust is obviously the number one thing in a relationship. And if obviously they need to rebuild trust if they've cheated on you. But for me, it's...
I know, but the thing is though, and I sympathize with anyone who's been in this situation because what is normal changes so quickly. And like if you've been with someone for X amount of time and then you start this behavior and you're in this type of relationship where you do check their phone or you are monitoring them because, they were the ones who originally broke your trust, like it becomes normal to you. And then the more you do it, the more you justify the reasons why you're doing it. And like, it's so easy from the outside to go, I would never want to be in a relationship like that. And I feel the same. I would never want to be in a relationship like that. But no one wants to be, but sometimes you find yourself there. And then you think, how the fuck did I get here? How is this my life that I'm living with this anxiety?
Well, that's something I wanted to ask Terri as well is, and it happens all the time in my friend groups, like we get people writing to us all the time, but it's it's how do you set a boundary and actually keep it? Because so many people I know, and exactly what you just said, it slowly
erodes.
It morphs and it becomes normal. How do you set your boundary and actually make sure it's true to what you want in the relationship? Because people go into a relationship and they're like, my boundary is you don't do drugs and you don't cheat on me. 6 months in, they're cheating because they're on drugs. And then all of a sudden someone's like, okay, well, just don't do it again. Like, how many times are you allowed to bend that boundary, and how do you make sure it's like set in stone?
Well, part of it is we have to acknowledge and understand we can't and don't control other people, but how boundaries work with repeat offenders, because that's what you guys are actually talking about, is someone where there's a repeated offense where we've established a boundary and maybe they've agreed to the boundary and now they're stepping over the boundary. So there has to be a consequence. So let's just say I had this example of, this was actually a therapy client of mine who was in a relationship with someone, and their agreement, right? One of her non-negotiables, right? Because that's important part of boundaries, to know, like, what is non-negotiable for you in your life. And one of those things was exactly what you said, Britt, which was drugs and drinking were not her thing. She was in recovery. This guy was in recovery, and they were together for a year and a half, super happy. And then he relapsed. And in the beginning, she was like, okay, just get back to meetings, blah, blah, blah. And then he relapsed again. And she basically was like, I can't live like this because it's threatening my, sobriety. And she said, if you don't get 90 days in the next 90 days, then you have to move out. And so there has to be a consequence of, like, you've got to get it together, or I'm moving out until you have 6 months or 9 months or whatever it is. And then you have to be willing to follow through. So I think that part of what people don't do is they don't set up a consequence, right? Even if it's something simple, it could be as simple as, let's just say you're at home and you're making dinner and you're saying to your significant other, let me know if you're going to be late. So then, I won't have the food ready when whatever. And if they don't do that, so 2 times, 3 times, there's got to be a point where you go, okay, we've had this conversation. You said you'd let me know. And so I'm now not making food for you. Like, your food's in the fridge, eat it whenever you want to. I'm eating without you. Now, as much as that may sound punishing, there's a reality that if you have a boundary and it continues to be crossed, you have to come up with what that consequence will be for you. So especially, and with the cheating as well, it's like there has to be something. Either we get into therapy together, you get in therapy alone, you move out until you get it together, and we can decide whether you want to. So there's got to be something, because if not, what is the thing that motivates human behavior? I hate to say it, but it's pain, right? And if there's no cost except you being mad for a period of time, it's not likely that someone's behavior is going to change.
No, and it's pretty standard behavior, isn't it? Like a human and animal response. We live and thrive off positive and negative reinforcement, and that is how we learn. It's how you train a dog, right? They do the right thing, you give them a reward, you give them their food. They don't, you put them outside, they're cold and they don't have their food. This is how they learn. And I don't think humans are any different.
Anytime my husband's naughty, I just put him outside with no clothes,
no
a lead, and no food.
What do you think you set boundaries the same way in relationships, friendships, and work relationships? So are all relationships grouped into the same boundary setting category?
Or do you have to take a different tactic?
Yeah.
Definitely take a different tactic, because think about it. The real thing with work is that if there's a power differential, that has to be considered, because you're not going to draw the same type of boundary with your boss.
I know I used to be okay with working, but I'm not okay anymore. My boundary has changed.
So how do you manage this when there is a power imbalance in your relationship? And there has to be, because of, like, exactly a work environment. How does that differ? Like, how is that a different type of boundary setting to a relationship that's meant to be equal?
Well, I think you have to be proactive and calculating with boundaries that you set at work with people who have power over you, right? So you have to take that in consideration. People will write me notes and be like, how do I tell my boss how I feel about blah, blah, blah? I'm like, P.S. you don't, because it's not even appropriate and he doesn't give a shit how you feel. But how can we get proactive and still get your need met? You don't need to be understood by your boss. You know what I mean? But if your boss is stepping over a boundary and calling you on the weekends and expecting you to work and you're not being paid for that work on weekends or whatever, that we need to get the data. When it comes to work boundaries, it's all about what is the data? What is the problem? What is the issue? What is the boundary that's needed? And then you look and see, how is the company laid out? Does it make the most sense to go to human resources? Because it depends on, is your boss like a normal person, or are they like a raging narcissist and they're going to like take it out on you and find a way to fire you? So I think we really do have to take into consideration who has power over us, which is very different than a coworker or very different than your friends, where you have equal power. You can make a simple request about some of their behavior and ask them to change something. You know what I mean?
I find this really interesting because I would assume that people who are codependent, who probably struggle with boundaries already, struggle with the different type of relationship within a workplace, in terms of they may cross over the boundaries of what's an appropriate relationship with a boss or with colleagues. And so therefore their personal life and their work life has become this muddled mess. And so they feel entitled to have conversations that may not be like, you know, as you say, your boss doesn't, of course they care in some way, but like it's not their responsibility to sit down and deeply care about the way you feel and all of the intricacies around your experience. They want it to be a good culture in the workplace. They want you to be able to be efficient, get your work done. But I think sometimes we, by our actions, muddle those relationships. And so then it becomes very conflated.
Without a doubt. And that's bad for everyone.
Yeah.
It's bad for you. It's bad for your productivity, but it's also bad for your internal life. You don't want everyone knowing your business, right? It can impact what happens to you at work, whether you get a promotion or not. They're like, well, your husband's doing great. You don't need it. Like, you don't know. Like, my feeling is keep work at work, keep your personal relationships personal, and be as professional as possible at work, because that's what's appropriate. It doesn't mean you can't be friendly, right? We can be friendly, but don't you have enough friends? Like, do we need to become friends with the people we work with?
I learned this lesson the hard way, and I mean, for everyone who's listening probably knows, but I have another business, which is Tony May. I'm a jewelry designer. We have employee staff, and I used to be best friends with all my staff. Like, I would become such close friends, and like we would all go out together, we would all do things together, and it made it incredibly hard for me as a business owner, as the boss of them, when they had done something that was not right, where they had broken the boundaries of work, or they just weren't showing up to work in a way that was in any way productive, and I was still having to pay them. It made it impossible for me to have a conversation with them about it. And
especially because on top of that, you're a people pleaser.
Yeah, because and I hated it.
Yeah.
It honestly, it caused me so much like internal conflict for many years. And now I'm at a point now where we have a bigger staffing, like we have the most staff we've ever had. My sister who works with me kind of is that second buffer, and I'm friendly with everyone, but I'm not friends with everyone. Yeah. And it's a much more professional relationship, and it has served me and my sanity and my anxiety so much better, so much better.
And it also serves your employees better.
Yeah, 100%.
Because they don't want the responsibility of being friends with their boss, because they're unclear about what the lines are. You know what I mean? And I did the same in my young life as a talent agent. Oh my God, it was like, you know, everyone was under 25. We represented all these young hot people. Like, no, showmances, romances, office, forget it. Like, it was just a mess, and it was so hard, especially when it was people I'm supposed to be, you know, having power over, where I know their entire life story. I'm too busy giving people therapy, well, long before I was a therapist. And it doesn't make you a good leader. And I think that what ends up happening, and you're seeing this, of course, in your business, Laura, that it ends up that when you have better boundaries, especially at work, having really clear boundaries, really good onboarding policies, letting people know the best way to communicate and when they can expect to hear back from you, letting your employees know what you expect from them. Like, it's amazing now that I run a whole company, how managing expectations with clear and clean agreements, how much more productive the company is, how much more money there is to make, how much better people feel, you know?
Terri, can we go off piste for a second and just backtrack to something completely unrelated? You just mentioned that you're a talent agent, and which I find really interesting. But you said that there are loads of showmancers. Question: are showmancers like a real thing in Hollywood, and how common are they? Because like we talk about romances all the time in people in the public eye. We've always been so curious if what percentage of them are actually real and what are just PR.
I would say, I mean, listen, when I had my practice in New York City, when I was a talent agent was one thing. Then I became a psychotherapist.
Yeah.
And my whole entire practice was Broadway performers, singers. It was just literally everyone in the entertainment business just came to me as their therapist.
Wow.
So I would have like 10 people in one show, like literally 10 people in Mamma Mia. I'm like, I have to stop taking people from Mamma Mia because
Conflict of
they all
interest.
know each other.
Yeah.
These people broke up. They're seeing each other in the lobby. Like it's a whole thing. But showmances are a real thing, especially when you have a show where it's all young people. Like think about Mamma Mia. Talk about everybody being under the age of 25. That's the entire show. And then one person would leave and go to Mary Poppins on Broadway. And then I would suddenly have like 7 people from Mary Poppins.
I read something recently, which was around, and you kind of just sparked my memory on this when you were speaking about dynamics within workplaces. But I think about this in terms of dynamics with parents. I kind of think this can happen a lot in single parent relationships, like mother-child relationships, especially, where like you become best friends with your children. Like my child is my best friend. I can only imagine that is quite an enormous load for a child to carry, to be a parent's best friend, especially because they don't have the mental or cognitive load to be able to take on all of the burdens of what adult life is. Can you talk to me a little bit about that sort of like parent-child dynamic and boundary setting, and what is a healthy relationship in navigating that, and where poor boundaries, like what determines a poor boundary in that sort of relationship?
Yep. That's such a great point. And it's funny because I always say, if you're a parent and you're saying, my daughter's my best friend, I always say, she wishes you'd stop saying that. Like, stop. It's such an albatross around her neck. And there's this responsibility that comes with that. Your kids want you to have your own friggin' life. Your kids don't want to have to worry about you, and they shouldn't have to. In a healthy family system, to the best of our ability, it is child focused, not child obsessed, right? So clarification, child focused in an appropriate way. A kid is going through school, they're playing a sport, you're taking them to that sport or to dancing, and you're going to see them, and you're coordinating their doctors, and they're going to their birthday parties, and child focused, not parent focused. So when it's parent focused, because the parent either has an addiction issue or is a single parent, is overwhelmed, is exhausted, is whatever, that puts the burden on the kid. So what are healthy boundaries? Children shouldn't be worried about the electricity bill, right? Kids shouldn't know, a 9-year-old shouldn't know that you're running out of cash. Figure it out, that's your job. You know, it's like, it's a burden because there's also nothing that a 9-year-old can do to change that, right? These are adult problems that need adult solutions. Talking to a child about your love life, talking to your child about the other parent, whether you're together or not. All of these things are no's. Do not do this. Do not triangulate your kid, especially if you're separated or divorced. Let your child love the other parent, please, because they need to. And if they feel that loyalty, that split loyalty, my God, that reverberates throughout the rest of their lives. Talk about codependency. Talk about dialing into someone's feelings. Talk about the kid being in what we call therapeutically a double bind. Meaning you're just screwed either way, right? You're screwed. If you love your mother, then your father feels bad. And if you love your father, your mother feels bad. Like bad mouthing the other person. Never do that to your kid. Never. Even if the other person is a total asshole, even if your co-parent is a psycho, which they may be, do not talk about them in that way. Do the best that you can to protect your kid from that, but you can't put that on a child. So I think really it's always being the grown-up. Like when you're the grown-up, it's you. And that means you can't need your child's approval. That means you've got to stop saying to a 3-year-old, is it okay if mommy, whatever? It's okay because the kid is 3 or 5
you're doing
or
it.
10. Don't ask them if it's okay. Stop giving them so many choices. They don't need 44 choices for lunch. let them choose between peanut butter and jelly and grilled cheese. Like there's age appropriate decision making, and I'm all for that, right? Like we learn as we grow. But I feel like with a lot of parents, there's so much like anything you want or everything you want, or what can I do? Oh, I'm like a short order cook. One of my friends says, I do 4 different meals every night for everyone. I'm like, why? Like, for whose benefit? That makes you feel needed, and it shows them that the world is going to give a shit about their every desire, which it does not and will not. Like, it's too much instant gratification, I feel like. So I don't know. I just went off?
No,
on
it's,
that,
this is
but-
so interesting.
I appreciate it so much because I do think that we've seen it, especially in like the kind of like mother-daughter dynamic, because I think we see like the Gilmore Girls, and there's been so many romanticized TV shows that highlight this like a beautiful friendship that happens between mother and daughter. And I know that you can have that, but I'm guessing it is over an appropriate age. And I think that there is this incredible burden that can be put onto especially like young teens as well, when you're like, I have this friendship with my daughter, because then the boundaries between parenting and friendship, keeping your kid safe and keeping your kid involved, is so completely blurred.
Well, you would imagine that it's probably, I think it's probably indicative of you, the mother, not having much in their life at that time.
Yeah.
If you're saying your 4, 5, 6-year-old is your best friend, like you need more hobbies or you need more adult friends. But I think it's probably muddy water when you're a parent to a teenager, that some of those best friend, she's my best friend moments are in fact trying to create this safe place for the teenager to feel like they can tell them everything. Like,
Totally.
I'm having sex. I need condoms.
Yeah,
I
Mum,
need
I
to go
wanna
on the
try
pill.
drugs. Yeah.
I want to try drugs. Okay, let me talk to you about that. So I guess it's probably a lot of muddy water in that.
Yeah, but there's a way to do that, right? There's a way that you can do that without impinging on their independence. There's a way to just tell the truth. Hey, when you're becoming sexual, I'll take you to the gynecologist. Let's talk about that. We don't have to massively talk about it, but I will bring you to the right doctor. Because here's what happens. In teenage land, we need to separate and individuate. And if you have a mom who's a best friend who you can't get mad at, who you're not allowed to like reject in some way because we're besties, it complicates this process that we kind of have to go through. I mean, and not everyone. I don't feel like I really did as a teenager myself. I was too busy because my sisters were all bad, so I was good. But it's like I couldn't differentiate. I couldn't act out because they'd already done it all.
They're taking that
Or it was
space.
Exactly. But you know what I mean? Like a daughter needs to step out, which is why you need to have rules. You need to have boundaries when you're parenting. They need to have a curfew because they need to step outside of that curfew. So if you don't have boundaries, now they got to step that much further out to differentiate, to get your attention. So it's not personal to you. Give them a curfew. They're going to come in home late sometime. And then you're going to be like, and now you can't go out on Saturday. Huh?
Yeah.
Like appropriate punishment, right? Appropriate. You're putting limits on what they're doing, but you're showing them consequences. We're teaching them deductive reasoning, critical thinking skills. This is our job as parents. And if you need that adulation or that adoration or that friendship from your kid, it's the wrong place to get it. Because sometimes your kid is going to be like, I can't stand you. I hate you. You're so mean. Let them. You can say, I remember one time our youngest son said to my husband, we were dropping him off at therapy. He was acting out. He was being so bad at that point. And he got out of the car. He was like 15 and he was like, I loathe you. He said to my husband as he's leaving. And my husband said, I love you too, son. And he was like, I said.
Also,
He was,
great,
like,
great use of the
screaming.
term. Like, low.
Do you know what though? I love the way you just described that, because I don't think I've ever in my life thought about like going back to the specific example of a curfew. I would only have ever seen the consequence as a punishment. I would have only ever seen like I'm being punished, whereas like this idea of and I even as an adult saying like, having consequences to my children now, like I'm like, that's a punishment for bad behavior. But I do really enjoy this reframe of like, this is me teaching you and setting up the rules of which that there are consequences when things don't happen. Because it's not about punishing your kids for doing the wrong thing, but it's about setting that expectation of how you want them to treat you and the rules of which the house, like, you know, the rules of which they have to abide to live within a house, especially as teenagers
Well, it
and young
lets
20s.
almost lets them manage their own life. Like you can go out on Friday night, you have to be home at 11. If you want to stay out later, great, but you won't go out next week. Like let them have the autonomy to make that decision of, is that extra hour worth not going out?
And also like the resilience building. I have this constant conversation with my partner, and I'm like, how do we build resilience in kids that are genuinely lucky? Like I know I can very much look at our kids and say they are privileged, they are lucky, and they are growing up in a household and environment where they're not short on love and they're not short on the things that they need in life. So how do you build that? How do you make sure that they're not just entitled little brats that get everything, you know, because it's very different to how I was raised. Like the resilience was drilled into me in a very different manner.
You were like cooking at 4 years old.
I was like, where's daddy? Like, you know, it's a very different situation. And I think, you know, we turned out okay, but I'm like, how do you create that in kids, but do it in a healthy way?
Make them work. Don't give them everything. Don't ply them with all these material things, like make them work for things. Don't be the answer to everything. How about ask your kids expansive questions? The moment they have a problem, don't get into fix-it mode. Say, hey, what do you think you should do? What does your gut say? Because you have a good gut. I trust it. So what is your gut? Like we're building their ability to trust themselves. And if they don't know, that's okay. But part of it is we have to teach them to problem solve. And we do that through conversation, not freaking out. Like they do something bad. Let's say they fail a test. You being like trying to figure it out. You have a lot of parents who are like, I'm going to go talk to the school and tell them that you were sick and that blah, blah, blah. No, allowing them, listen, you failed because you didn't study. That is a consequence for your chosen action. If you want me to help you study the next time, I will. We have to let the chips fall where they may and let kids experience some consequences for their actions and stay lovingly connected to them throughout, not in a mean way, like not sadistically, right? Like we're doing it in a way of like, yeah, that sucks. Okay. So we're here now and I'm here with you, but I'm not fixing it because you want them. Like think about how resilient you became in your life. And I think about this in my life because when I was raised, people were like, good luck. Like my parents did. Our parents had no good idea where we were at any given moment.
Same.
At any age. I was going to bars at 14. I looked 24. Like, stop.
But also,
like, how am I alive and nothing awful happened to me? I have no idea.
100%.
I just remember going on my bike like on a Saturday morning. You'd go on the bike and they'd be like, see you at 5.
Yeah.
And you'd be gone for 10. They don't know where you are. There's no phones.
My
It's just
mum
like-
would literally say, don't come home till it's getting dark.
Yeah.
Don't come home. Like, okay, I'll stay out until the sunset. You know, I could
Thanks.
It's a
never.
different time.
Can you imagine?
Fuck, I
Like,
would
never.
never. I
Oh,
couldn't-
now.
now, like, and I mean, I do think it's hard though because we're exposed to so much more of the realities of what can happen, and so the unrelenting news cycle, like hearing the Netflix documentaries about all the horrible things that happen to kids, it creates the fear in you, and so like we now are more, I think, helicopter because we're very aware of like the worst case scenario. But I think we're the first generation to be that. And so you think, well, then what's that going to do to our kids when they don't have the agency to fall down, hurt themselves and figure it out themselves because we're always there to protect them.
I remember once, this is a memory that just popped into my head. I remember once that happened, right? Go on your bike, come home in 10 hours. And I was so far away in a quarry and I fell off and I broke my arm. And I couldn't move, or it was like completely snapped in half. And then my other brother, I had to wait for my other brother to ride by the quarry, flag him down, and then he had to ride like an hour home. Then my dad had to drive into the quarry to pick me up.
Yeah.
But it's because there's like,
You're
there's
fine.
no phones, there's no, and I mean, you're going to live, right? Like you're going to live. And I think that is the shit that builds resilience.
Yeah. Where you go through hard things and you're like, okay, I guess I can do that. But another thing I wanted to say about the parenting thing with boundaries is that when we insert ourselves into the middle of someone else's problem, even our kids, we're really centering that problem on us. And what we really want to be doing with kids in particular is we want to let it be centered on them. What do they think they should do? How do they feel about it? Tell me more about it. Like open-ended questions. and you'll figure it out. But don't be so afraid for your kid to fail, because they're going to be fine. We all failed, right? When we all broke our arms and sat there for 4 hours, as you just said, and somehow here you are, right?
Yeah.
Terri, thank you so much for all of your wisdom. We absolutely adore speaking to you. And I know for me, there's so many moments in the things that you spoke about that I relate to deeply. And I know that for our listeners, there will be people who have picked up parts of these conversations, whether it was parenting, whether it's codependency, whether it's navigating in their own relationships. I think there's been so much in this for literally for everybody. Thank you for your time. And it's amazing chatting to you.